Welcome, everyone. I'm Lisa Fain, CEO of Center for Mentoring Excellence, but here in my capacity as a member of the board of the International Mentoring Association, with my colleague from the board, Ben Kutsyuruba. Really excited to continue our expert interview series with Ben today. So before we dig in, let me tell you a little bit about him. Dr. Benjamin Kutsyuruba is a professor of educational policy, leadership, and school law in the Faculty of Education at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. For 10 years, he served as an associate director of social program evaluation in the Faculty of Education for Queen's University. He's worked as a teacher, a researcher, a manager, and a professor in the field of education in Ukraine and Canada. And his teaching research areas include educational policy making, educational leadership, the induction, mentorship, and development of teachers, trust, an area we will talk a little bit more about, moral agency, and ethical decision-making in education. Even more, international education, school climate, safety, well-being, and flourishing educational change. So lots to talk about. He's authored and co-authored several books, including his most recent book, which is the Lifecycle of Trust, about leaders as moral agents, which he authored with Keith Walker and E.L. Gar. And he's co-edited a book on Canadian early career teachers' experiences with induction and mentoring, and is an incoming editor for Perspectives on Mentoring book series, actively involved in the executive board and on the committee instead of IMA. So Ben, welcome. So happy that you're here.
Thank you very much, Lisa. It's great to be here.
So let's just dig right in. And my first question for you is, tell me about why you're so passionate about the research and practice of mentoring.
When I thought back about my experiences that led me to where I am right now as a mentor, I always think back to my parents. And at the time, I didn't realize that they were actually mentoring me for a lot of aspects of my life. But their mentoring was a bit different from mentoring that I received from my friends, my critical friends, who helped me get through life, get through school and university. And I'm blessed to have had a lot of great mentors in my life. And I think those experiences have solidified the passion for learning more about mentoring when I started. I didn't really understand what mentoring was until I started doing a bit of research for my master's, when I started looking at what kept beginning teachers in schools in my master's. And it was a comparative study between Canada and Ukraine. And as part of the literature review, I came across the notion of mentoring and how it connects the proteges and the mentors, how mentors impart knowledge. And I realized that I have experienced mentoring, but I did not know the term until then. And it sounds different in Ukrainian as well, but it kind of goes along the same way. It can be loosely translated as coaching, or somebody who imparts knowledge to you and who is a mentor. But I did not know the term mentoring. So when I started digging deeper into the research area, into this research area, I started realizing that I am really passionate. I have a passion for understanding what keeps the beginning teachers, including me at that time, because I was a beginning teacher within the first couple of years before I went into my master's. And I realized that I had a lot of mentoring support, whether it was from my colleagues at the school, or from school administrators, or even from my colleagues that we worked through the university years together. And when I started understanding what mentoring looked like, I realized that I have to dig deeper, and I also have to share the knowledge and understand what makes mentoring that one of those key aspects of education. Because my area is in education, I realized that mentoring transcends a lot of practices that we do in education, where we see teachers, I see myself as a teacher by default being a mentor, where you share your experience and your expertise and knowledge with those who are newer to the profession. So that's where my passion stems from, and I think it has grown, especially when I started doing more research in international settings. And since I've joined the International Mentoring Association, I think I've even grown further in my understanding in my journey of what mentoring means to me personally, and how I can help others to grow, and how my mentoring can mold their future as well.
Wow. And are you focusing, when you're focusing your work, is it in the school context, in the university context? What is the subject context of your research?
So initially it was focused only on school context, where I was trying to understand the role of mentoring for beginning teachers or early career teachers. Within the first 2 to 5 years, research shows that a lot of teachers leave within the first 2 to 5 years, and the attrition rates are higher in some countries like Canada, Ukraine, and I think particularly in US, the attrition of early career teachers is much higher than in other parts of the world. So initially that was the focus on the school mentoring within the school context. But as I started teaching in the university context, I realized that there's a lot of potential of building the mentorship capacity. And even in our university, in our faculty here, we have two mentoring programs. One is for graduate student mentoring program, GSMP, that we have developed about 12 years ago, along with my graduate student, PhD student at that time. She has since moved on and she's mentoring her own students. And I'm happy to say that the mentoring program is still flourishing with other graduate students supporting. And then we also started talking about, it's not just graduate students that need support, mentoring support, also new faculty members. In the last 14 years that I've been here at Queen's, we probably had a turnover of about 50% of faculty members. So I have new faculty members coming in, and they all need the support. So we've established the new faculty mentoring program for those who are pre-tenure, and then those who are post-tenure, but still not necessarily have reached full professorship. They have not advanced have not been promoted to full professorship. So we gear it towards the needs of those who are still pre-tenure and post-tenure. And then we also encourage those who have been blessed by mentoring from others to then engage, turn around and mentor those who are just coming into the profession or coming into our place, moving from other universities to our faculty.
That's great. I mean, it really sounds like what you've developed is a mentoring culture there. So love to hear that. Let's talk a little bit about your research. What are some of the key findings that you had from your research about mentoring of early career teachers?
So let me share my screen, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
I prepared a little PowerPoint presentation with some of the key findings from our research. About 5 years ago, we engaged in it's more than that. So about 10 years ago, we started looking at research that we tried to understand what were some of the supports that were needed for early career teachers in Canada, along with my long-term mentor and friend and colleague, Keith Walker, who you mentioned at the outset. So we do a lot of work together, and I've been blessed by his mentorship. So we've started looking at some of the research, and we started with the document analysis because we needed to understand what are some of the structures that exist, what are some of the documentary evidence that we can find for the role of induction and mentoring programs. And we were specifically trying to understand the role of mentoring within the induction program. The induction program is the program that supports the beginning teachers in their first 2 years or 3 years, depending on the context. So what we found across the Canadian jurisdictions, and to give you a bit of a context, we have a provincial responsibility for education in Canada, where each province, similar to in the US, it will be state responsibility. Each province determines the laws and policies related to education. So we found that because of that provincial responsibility, we found a variety of structural and programmatic supports. What was interesting to see that there were different groups that were involved in different jurisdictions. So with some programs were provincially mandated, some were supported through the teacher association or federation level. We also found some evidence of decentralized support that was offered through the school district level. But an interesting finding was that we found a lot of evidence for hybrid programs that were offered either through the collaboration between the university, teacher association, school boards, community groups. And within that, specifically, we tried to understand what was the role of mentoring. And as you will see, mentoring was not evident in all territories and provinces. So let's say that within the provincially mandated programs, mentoring was included in the induction process. That's where it says IM in the table, but also some provinces do not have mentoring built in. And that was especially evident at the decentralized program, where mentoring was only evident in some of the districts. And that was a bit of a concern for us, because in the research, we know from the research that we know that mentoring that is paired along with the induction program, or when mentoring is built into the induction program, it has the greatest impact on the retention and professional development of teachers. So from there, we wanted to understand what makes the mentoring culture, something that you mentioned before and you've done some work on. We also noticed that mentoring was often related to evaluation, and by definition, mentoring should not be related to evaluation, where the school principals or school administrators were also mentors, and they sometimes had to take one hat off of being an evaluator and then put in a hat of being a mentor, and that created a bit of a misunderstanding of the role, but also inability or sometimes unwillingness on behalf of beginning teachers to share with their principals something that may be misconstrued as lack of competence, because they're just starting in their profession. So we invited teachers in their first 5 years across Canada to participate in the study. We had close over 1,300 responses. That was the sample that we used. And we had representation from all territories and provinces in Canada. So we wanted to understand what is it that beginning teachers needed. What was interesting to see that, first I'll talk about the demographics. So we noticed that the average age for the teachers was around 29, between 29 and 30. So that means that they're coming later into the profession of teaching across Canada. And then we had about 20-80 split in terms of percentage between female and male respondents. In terms of teaching experiences, we had a fairly equal split within 1/5 between the year 1 and year 5. And interestingly, 1 out of 4 teachers who participated in our study were teaching outside of their grade level. So that was an interesting finding that will probably explain some of the findings for that I'm going to mention later today. So when we asked them to discuss the types of supports that they valued as beginning teachers, as you will see, informal mentoring was at 73%. So 73% mentioned that informal mentoring was one of the key supports. And then if you look further down, it's 27% was formal mentorship, along with other supports. So when we started looking at the sources of supports, we realized it was fairly similar to what we've seen through our document analysis. Some were coming from provincial government, from teachers associations, school boards, but also a lot of them were coming from within the school, about 40%. And when we asked them to further discuss the most beneficial types of supports, informal mentorship was deemed to be the most beneficial type by over 40% of them. So that was an interesting finding, and in comparison to the formal mentorship, that only 6% mentioned that formal mentorship was the most beneficial.
I wonder, can I interrupt you with a question for a second on that slide?
Yeah.
Do you think that was a function of the effectiveness of the formal mentorship programs?
Potentially. We also thought that it might be evidence might be evidential of some of the structural aspects that exist for mentoring, whereas you remember that only one type of the mentoring programs was mandated, and some programs were not formalized by the school district, by the teacher associations, and it was open for the beginning teachers to participate or not. And so maybe that the lower percentage of formal mentorship was due to those structural aspects. But it was interesting that the informal was also evident within those beginning teachers who were in the formal programs as well. So they realized that beyond their formal mentoring structures, they needed to find informal supports from their colleagues, from school administrators, and outside of school.
Yeah, I mean, that slide alone, Ben, is really food for thought in so many different ways, right? I think just the inquiry about where that preference comes from and whether it's indicative of what else might be going on in the environment. Interesting. Sorry to interrupt your flow, but
no, feel free to do that. It just adds a little bit more context and expands on the findings. When we asked them, have those supports, the ones that the chart that I showed earlier, whether they have met their needs as beginning teachers, it was interesting that the colleague support was built, the mentoring was built into the colleague support, and that colleague support has met their needs as beginning teachers. So I highlighted some of the mentoring findings, mentoring specific findings on the chart here. So we had a specific area in the survey where we looked at the role of mentorship, and I'd like to further delve into that. When we started analyzing the data, we noticed that over 2/3 of the participants reported having a mentor, with the majority of them reporting informal mentors as the most beneficial. So similar to what I mentioned before. And in terms of the aspects that mentors provided that were the most beneficial were a couple. Collaboration was really big. A guided teaching where others, their mentors shared resources, modeled their teaching, and guided non-teaching, which was feedback, advice, mutual first-time experiences, and it was based on the relational aspects. And you and I know that relationships are key for mentoring. And it was interesting to see that guided non-teaching, the feedback, the relationship building aspects, including the more formal collaborative pieces, were very important. And we also asked them a question: what were some of the challenges with mentoring? And they talked about processes, especially not finding time to meet within the mentoring program. Structures did not provide time for observation or for feedback, and relationships were also included in some of the challenges because relationships do not often work in mentoring relationships, in mentoring structures, due to different teaching styles, personality differences, where beginning teachers felt that their mentors did not care or share resources. And so when we asked them, for those of you who had a mentor, and it was a bit alarming to us that out of over 1,300 responses, 33% had no mentoring experience within their first 1 to 5 years. For those who did have mentoring experiences, you will see that they talked about multiple informal mentors, multiple formal and informal mentors. They talked about informal mentor, one, and also 20% talked about having one formal mentor. It did show a bit of a spread in terms of how many mentors they had, and some even had multiple formal mentors, which again talks to the variety of structural and procedural aspects of mentoring programs across Canada. I hope we have some time to delve into some specific questions. I think that would be very helpful to kind of unpack some of the general findings. We asked them how often they met with their mentors, and the mean was fairly often, but it was between sometimes and often, so not necessarily very often. So that talks about the structural and limitations of mentoring programs. Some mentors did provide constructive feedback about their practice, but the average was, again, between sometimes and often, not all the time. They did feel that their mentors provided constructive feedback about their students' learning, and they clearly communicated schools' expectations. The mentors did not have a lot of time to observe the teaching to enable more effective practices. So that was an important finding, a significant finding, that if they don't find time as mentors to observe the teaching, then their early career teachers are at a disadvantage in their first few years.
Yeah, I wonder if that, sorry, just a thought on that one. I wonder how much of that is influenced by the fact that so much of this is informal mentorship. Because informal mentorship, I would imagine, and I'm curious your thoughts about this, Ben, that if it was a formal mentorship, the mentor may understand that that's an expectation, or certainly a marker of best practices. In informal mentorship, it's like, I don't necessarily have time or understanding that that would be an effective practice.
Yeah, and we also thought about this finding in terms of, if they did not get that observation from their formal mentors, they started seeking informal mentorship and asking others, colleagues, to come in and observe or maybe provide some feedback about their lesson plans and other aspects of their teaching. In addition to, being in the first few years, they're all often bombarded with different expectations and demands that add to their, challenges. In one of our books, we call the Blisters of early career teaching, where they actually go through a lot of those challenges in order to get to the bliss. So we juxtapose bliss and blisters. But we also found that it was quite encouraging to see that beginning teachers felt that their mentors encouraged them to try different teaching approaches, helped them guide and set goals related to student learning. And they did have, very often, they had professional conversations, which was quite encouraging for us to see from the findings. They did find time to work with more experienced teachers to plan collaboratively, and again, maybe it's connected to the informal mentorship piece. And they also talked about that the mentoring helped them discuss their ongoing career plans. I think a couple more. The mentorship was helpful in setting the professional development goals, and also mentors helped them communicate with school administrators, again, trying to get over that barrier of us versus them, where administrators are on the other side, and you feel like, as a beginning teacher, if I talk to my school administrator, I may come across as incompetent because I'm asking all of these questions. So their mentors were like a buffer between the school administrators and early career teaching. When we further dug into the data analysis, we found that mentoring has been most valuable to the beginning teachers and their teaching due to collaborating nature, whether it was reports cards planning, and other aspects guiding their teaching through resources, modeling teaching, model communication, but also, and most importantly, was about the feedback, advice, non-teaching related support, routines and procedures, encouraging, just saying you're doing a great job, building the network that they needed, pushing them, answering questions, providing more information about students, and most importantly, offering emotional supports that a lot of beginning teachers don't have due to their lack of confidence at the beginning when they're just coming into the new career. In terms of challenges, there were procedural, structural, and relational aspects similar to what I mentioned before. But what we found most significant was the structural aspects that were the most challenging, where they wanted feedback, they wanted observation, they wanted to have formal mentorship, but the school structures did not provide them with that. Maybe a couple more slides. Some of the factors that have been instrumental in their continuing in the teaching profession. So one of the questions was, have you ever thought of leaving the profession? We found that mentoring was a part of that in external support. mentoring structures, in addition to the colleague support, administration support, professional development, and family support, community support that help them stay in the profession, in addition to some of the internal aspects that like work-life balance, being hopeful, enjoying their profession, feeling capable, having the desire to improve, and building on their passion to stay in the profession. So it was quite encouraging for us to see that mentoring helped them stay, and that was one of those external factors. We also asked them how they felt about the intensity and pace of work and how that increased. And how that affected their induction and socialization. And they felt that overall their time, the workload was too intense, and they felt they needed more time. They were tired. They experienced fatigue, and I think that's where the connection to the informal mentoring was most evident, because they wanted to find that connection at work, and they also wanted to, talk to somebody about their fatigue, whether it was physical or mental. Their social life was affected, and they wanted to connect with somebody who could help them not being isolated, because teaching is by default, by nature, is a very isolating profession. Some of the advice that they have given to other new teachers was find a mentor, and then again talks about the importance of having a mentor at the beginning of their career. And we asked them, if you were a mentor to beginning teachers, what would you be sure to do? And they highlighted two aspects. One was relationship building, be encouraging, be honest, be supportive. But another one was teaching and school related, talk about the profession, collaborate with others, find mentors, the formal mentors, provide feedback, help with time management. So it was similar to what they've experienced in terms of challenges. These
developmental items too, right?
Yeah. These aspects help them alleviate some of the challenges that were discussed. And a couple of last points from the findings. One was about the flourishing and thriving, and you mentioned that as part of one of my research interests, and that's a fairly new interest in my academic career, looking at the flourishing and thriving. So we asked them about their own well-being and flourishing and thriving, and mentoring was included in the staff factor, in addition to the personal aspects that helped them do well and flourish and thrive, and structural aspects like having the structure, professional learning time. But mentoring was the most important part from the staff or collegial aspects of the supports that help them be well. So we dug deeper into that in our factor analysis, and we found, again, within that external well-being, the collegial well-being, one aspect that was very key in relation to their overall well-being score was informal peer mentoring or group mentoring in their school was a big part of feeling that they're flourishing, that they're thriving, and then that led to retention and them staying in the profession rather than leaving. So that's in a nutshell a couple of findings from some of our research.
That's great. That's great. How have you been able to apply this research since its completion?
So we did publish a book, and let me get to that part. I'll skip a few things. So I had other slides, but I'm gonna go here. We did publish the research in the Bliss and Blisters book that you mentioned of early career teaching. And that was very well received because it was a very collaborative process for us. When we did that research, we worked with teacher associations and ministries of education across Canada, and we shared our data with them based on the provincial samples. And a lot of teacher associations or ministries of education have taken those findings and the data and have analyzed them further and modified their programs. So one province, British Columbia, they've taken their sample and they've taken some of our findings and they've run with them, and they've completely revamped their mentoring program that they offer through the Teacher Association for all beginning teachers within their first 2 years. And that's probably the best knowledge mobilization that you can have when you do an extensive research and you share it, and then you see some of the outcomes on the ground and helping beginning teachers. We also see a lot of connection to mentoring and the role of mentoring in creating flourishing schools. So two of our recent books, one is coming out in 3 days, The Leadership for Flourishing in Educational Context, and The Positive Leadership of Flourishing Schools have come out earlier this year. But these two books have a lot in them that looks at what mentoring cultures, how mentoring cultures help the beginning teachers thrive and do well in the school. But also a key aspect of mentoring, something that we saw from our research, was the role of trust, especially about in relation to the relationship building aspects of mentoring. And when there's no vulnerability, there's no risk, there's no need for trust. And we found that beginning teachers were in that vulnerable space, where a lot of what they were doing was related to risk. They were taking risks, whether learning new things or opening up to colleagues and saying, I'm not very competent in this teaching strategy. Can you help me? Or even talking to administrators. And we found that trust was the most paramount factor in making sure that mentoring relationships and mentoring cultures in schools work.
I have a million questions for us to discuss offline about that and the impact of it, but it's so powerful. And just, as a headline, I find the same thing without having done the empirical research, just in my own experience in the corporate context. When you look at sustainability, I love the way you said it. And I just want to, I think what I heard you say then, and repeat it or correct me if I'm wrong, is when there isn't vulnerability and there isn't something else, there's no trust. What was the other thing that you said?
Risk and vulnerability. Yeah. Right.
You don't need trust if you're not willing to be vulnerable and you're not willing to take risks. So super powerful. We will, in addition to making sure that people can use the QR codes on the screen, we'll link your books in the notes below the video posted as well. And so for those watching, you can buy the books, but also we'll link Ben's contact information so you can ask him questions if you're open to that, Ben.
Totally.
So let's wrap up with a different kind of question, which is in your own practice as a supervisor and a mentor to students, what are some of the practices and approaches that you use that you find to be most effective?
I've done a bit of reading, I'd have to say, as part of my focus on mentoring. And one model that I really like, and I always keep coming back to it, that has been the most powerful in my experience. It has been developed by one of my mentors and colleagues, Keith Walker, that I mentioned at the outset, and we've written some of the, actually all of the 4 books that I shared that were done with Keith. He's mentored me through my master's, through my PhD, and although he was never my formal supervisor, he has mentored me in a variety of different aspects of my life, coaching and mentoring for the academic world, my scholarship research. And together with another colleague from the University of Saskatchewan, who is now retired, Edwin Rolfe, they've developed what is called adaptive mentorship, or used to be called contextual supervision. And I would like to share this. And if for those who are interested in learning more about this, it's built on the situational leadership approach, where the leader responds to the needs of the follower based on what their needs are around the specific task. So adaptive mentorship model that I use in my mentoring practices when I supervise my students, when I supervise research assistants, when I supervise teaching assistants, I use this adaptive mentorship, and it's proven to be very helpful for my students as well. And so I've used it a lot. And what it does it provides a bit of a structural approach that when we were talking about the findings from the early career teaching research, some structural structural supports were not there. And so with adaptive mentorship model, it's not set in stone, but it allows you to adapt your response as a mentor to the protege's need. Let's look at the protege's developmental level around a specific task. They may be either low in competence or high in competence, or low in confidence and high in competence on a given task. It might be, for example, writing a thesis using APA style, which is the American Psychological Association style that we use for references and citations. And so they may have, a lot of confidence with their writing, but they're not highly competent with using the style. And so based on that, I would say, so they're probably, if they're low in competence, but they have high confidence, they're somewhere at D1 level. So as a mentor, what would be the most appropriate adaptive response? And that would be A1, which is high task, but low support. And so high task meaning providing more directions, guiding and instructing them how to use a specific style. But in terms of emotional support and encouragement, they don't need that because they're already highly confident that they can write. They have confidence in writing. It's just more direction in terms of using style. It's always nice to have students at the D4 level, highly competent and highly confident. Then your role as a mentor is more laissez-faire, hands-off approach, low support and low task, because they can run with it. There's no need for me to be in there, providing more direction or providing more emotional support. But that's not always the case. So what this model allowed me to do is modify, adapt my response as a mentor in terms of what the protege's or mentee's developmental needs are.
That's great. How do you assess their developmental needs?
The model allows for a collaborative approach. So we've done it where we've asked the research assistants to self-assess where they are for a specific task. And then I do my own assessment, and then we look at, and most of the time it's congruent because we talk about it before that. What would this look like? What would a D1, D2, D3, D4 look in this specific task? But if there's discrepancy, we try to alleviate, and then we talk about it. So what would be my response as a mentor in terms of where you think and where we think together you are for this specific task?
So practical. I think I can really see the utility of that in terms of meeting your both the relational, right, and the I guess operational, the only other term I can think of, needs of your mentee, and really kind of creating that trust and rapport. Terrific. That's terrific. So Ben, final words of advice for people who are looking, particularly in the educational context, to make the most of their mentoring relationships.
It's a lofty task to provide advice, but I guess always start with finding the mentor. One of the pieces of advice that we got from the beginning teachers on that question that, if you were a mentor, what would you do? And I always go back to that and think about what would I do if I were a mentor in this particular situation. And for the educational context, I'd say try to find the mentor as much as possible. There's 3C: connect, collaborate, and I can't remember the third one. And communicate, connect, and collaborate. Those are the 3 C's, I'd say the vitamin C's that you need for a solid and healthy mentoring relationships. You need to connect with the person who can help you grow, collaborate in whatever capacity, work together on a lot of things, but also communicate and build trust. And that's the key aspect of communication. So that would probably be the the advice that I would give to somebody seeking to grow their mentoring capacity. And look for opportunities. Don't assume that there's limited opportunities that exist in education. There's always some opportunities, whether formal or informal, in education to grow, and just adapt a growth mindset for your own approach.
I'm so appreciative of the work you do and the wisdom you share today. Thank you so much for taking the time to share with the IMA broader community. And for those who are watching and want to learn more, as I said, we will post links below, and don't hesitate to use those QR codes that Ben shared in his presentation as well. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I really appreciate your time and this series that you have put together on sharing the wisdom and the expertise on mentoring with others.
Thanks.